Ladies and gentlemen, fellow speakers, contributors and listeners, we are literally hours away from the FIFA World Cup 2014 final, which is due to be held between Germany and Argentina, and we're literally less than an hour away between what is regarded by many as the most important, the most dramatic, and possibly one of the most controversial World Cups that the world has ever seen in the world of soccer, where some of you come to know in your countries the game of football. Now, personally, I'm not much of a football fan, but I must tell you that in our country in 2010, we had the honor of hosting the World Cup. And, I think many people, we sort of get caught into the emotion of these games as we watch them. And I follow World Cup for this very reason. People pour a lot of emotion into sport, and as I've said, I'm not really much of a sports fan. But I witnessed a few days ago probably one of the most dramatic matches I've ever seen, and as many of you know by now, Brazil received what has been described by many as probably the most crushing defeat that they've ever suffered at the hands of any other team, national, international, on home soil. Brazil lost 7 goals. They conceded 7 goals to Germany's 1. And, just reading some of the headlines, the headlines describe this as a massacre. They describe it as a national humiliation, a national tragedy. That, the Brazil team will never recover from this. In fact, even the Brazilian president has urged many of her citizens to somehow bounce back from this as a nation. And it really got me thinking as to, why people pour so much emotion into a sporting event. And I think what people need to realize here is that it doesn't matter whether it's a football game or a rugby game or a soccer game, as some people call it, whether it's martial arts, whether it's ballet, whether it's even a simple game that we play on a Sunday afternoon, or maybe it could be an Olympic event. I think what we need to realize is that human beings are emotional creatures. We pour a lot of emotional intensity into the things that we are very passionate about. And other people may regard it as just a sport or just a game. I mean, as I've said before, I'm not a soccer fan. So I might look at a game of soccer and think, well, what's the big deal? But what you must realize is, to another person, it's not just simply a game. It could be their very heart and their very soul. And whether it's an entire nation supporting their team on an international pitch, or whether it's just a single person doing something that they're really passionate about, it's very, very, very important to that person. And I'm a German supporter. I mean, I don't follow the game, but I watched the semi-final between Brazil and Germany as a German supporter, and I must say I was thrilled at the game initially. But as the goals went into the net, one after another, that celebration, that sense of ecstasy quickly turned to a sense of, I actually felt a visceral form of pain as I watched the Brazilian supporters. And never in my 36 years at the time of publishing this presentation have I ever witnessed such a saddening scene. I've never seen such pain etched onto the faces of not only players but supporters. And I came to really reflect on this over the past couple of days. And this draws on a subject which is very close to my heart, and that's, we live in a society of competitiveness. We live in a society that seems to measure not just people, but men specifically, by their performance. And I don't know if any of you have ever had the experience where on an individual level, you've just poured everything that you have as a human being into what you're doing. You have this massive expectation, you pour resources into it. And I know in the case of Brazil, I see figures of, they spent in the region of $11 billion developing infrastructure for this particular World Cup. And, have you ever had that experience where you just pour everything that you have into something that's so important to you? You have this great expectation, and when you don't get the expectation, not only do you not get that expectation, but you fail, and not only fail, but you fail dismally. And the pain that you feel in that moment, especially when you're on the public stage, and the very people that you look to for support actually abandon you. They discard you as though not only you're no longer relevant, but they treat you with shame and disdain. They almost excommunicate you from the country. Have you ever had that experience where you've poured so much into something, and not only does it go wrong, it goes disastrously wrong? And the very, very, very people that you look to for support, whether it be your spouse or your family or your country or your football team or whoever it may be, the very people that you look to for support are the very people that abandon you. You know, it's often been said that if nations are going to face one another in a conflict situation, rather it be on the sports field than on the battlefield. I think to myself, you know, warfare, we can kill each other's bodies with swords, with guns, with bombs, with airplanes, with tanks. But can there be any greater death than the death of the soul? And what could be more painful a death for the soul than the death of shame? And I just can't get over what I saw that day. And this is really something that's very close to my heart. You know, we live in a society that measures. We live in a society that seems to regard men specifically as worthless until we can prove ourselves, either on a football pitch or on the boardroom. And if we don't deliver, we're not worth it. And worse, if we are defeated catastrophically, we are regarded as less than human. We're treated with scorn and with shame. And, you know, we wonder why men just don't raise up to the occasion anymore. We're not just talking about football here. We're talking about something that really showcases how human beings treat one another during failure. I mean, whether it's in a relationship or whether it's in a business, we treat each other with scorn and with shame when we don't reach an expectation. And we set ourselves this massive end result. And on this journey of trying to achieve what's so important to us as humans, it's almost as though we forget who we are along the journey. And when we finally get to that journey, if we don't achieve what we're looking for, it's a massive defeat. It suddenly becomes a tragedy. But when we do achieve, we get that trophy, or we win that World Cup. In our personal lives, we're faced with a sense of emptiness, and we kind of find ourselves asking, well, you know, gee, is this all there is? And why does that happen? You know, why is it that when we invest so much of ourselves, whether as an individual or as a country, into achieving this grand result, why is it that when we get to that result, when we actually succeed against overwhelming odds, we're left with a sense of emptiness? And yet if we don't make it, it's as though our souls are being murdered with shame. Why is that? Is there something deeper behind all of this? Should we maybe see this match between Brazil and Germany as a kind of as a paradigm for how humans live today? Why do we do this to people? You know, it's something that I've always found very fascinating, and I think it's something that is relevant to men specifically, because we seem to be living in a modern era where if we're not performing, if we're not constantly striving to get the attention of somebody else, if we're not competing against somebody else for resources, it doesn't matter. And then society asks why gentlemen are disappearing, whether gentlemen are on the football pitch or whether we're in society or whether we're in relationships or businesses or social gatherings. Gentlemen are disappearing because they're realizing that, well, we're not going to get ahead unless we're competitive, and we're either going to win and have an empty victory as a result, and we'll just have to keep winning. I mean, isn't this interesting? Let's just say that Brazil had won. Let's just say that that team had delivered a spectacular result. Society starts to expect more from winners. In other words, the more you win, whatever victory you had is only going to last for a few moments before your spectators start to expect more from you. So if you're not losing, you're having to constantly keep winning against higher and higher stakes just to keep that sense of that you matter, that you actually matter in society. And if you're not losing, you're constantly striving to reach a higher ideal. It's almost impossible. And then people wonder why, you know, men or society in general just gives up. And keeping in mind, you know, I'm a nobody. I'm just doing YouTube presentations. My life isn't in the public eye. You know, football stars or movie stars are constantly in public eye day in and day out. And the smallest mistake that they make, they get broadcasted all over the media. Why do we treat people this way? Why don't we just celebrate our football teams simply because we support them? And this is the closing message I'd like to leave with all of you as we head into the final moments before the World Cup final between Germany and Argentina, the FIFA 2014 World Cup. Don't just support your team because they win or because they lose. Support your team because you support your team. And my message to the Brazilian fans I know that this, for many of you who really support soccer and really had so much emotional capital invested into this outcome, please don't boo, your team off the field. From where I was sitting on that day, a few days ago during the semi-final, the Brazilian team really knew. They didn't need to be reminded by the media again and again and again of the magnitude of what it takes on home soil. They suffered the worst defeat that they've ever suffered in probably many years, if not decades. And they don't need to be reminded of that. And I think, if anything, this is the time when they need your support the most. They need to feel from their country, from their colleagues, from their compatriots and their clubs that they're supported as human beings no matter what the outcome. And as we head into this final match, see this event, see this, what has been described on the surface as a disaster, is probably a lesson for humanity. Don't repeat the mistakes of warfare on the sports field, because if we do that, we've not really made much progress. Support your team because you believe in them. Support your spouses because you believe in them. Support each other in your ventures because you believe in each other. And don't attach to an outcome, but rather find a way to enjoy the journey along the way, so that when you do reach that big goal, whatever it may produce, success or failure, that you've not lost yourself along the way, whether you've done this as a nation or as a person. Thank you for listening to this presentation, and enjoy the World Cup while it lasts. And may you have many happy events afterwards, and I hope to be producing more presentations like this soon. Thank you and good evening.